David, let me start with you. Take me through your reporting and sort of what it adds to the bigger picture.
Well, you probably know that the Trump Organization and President Trump are facing two pretty significant state-level investigations, one from the Manhattan DA and one from the New York Attorney General. So these aren't going to be things that are going to get anybody arrested, I don't think, before Election Day. But if Trump loses, or even if he wins, there'll be real headaches next year. And I think it also gives you more of a sense of what the Trump Organization worked like before Trump went into office. And so we wanted to understand why the New York Attorney General was focusing on this kind of obscure piece of Trump's portfolio, this Seven Springs mansion outside of New York City. He rarely even goes there. So why is it at the center of this big state investigation? And the reason is $21 million. Trump got a $21 million tax break for saying he would conserve land on that property. And the reason he got such a big tax break was that he said the land was really valuable, had lots of development rights. Turns out he appears to have misled people about how much development rights he had. He'd actually applied to build houses, but didn't succeed. So he didn't have those permissions in hand, yet he was still claiming credit for them, inflating the value of the property and thus inflating his tax break.
You know, Andrew Weissmann, it reminds me of the conversation you and I had just about how leveraged he is when the first installment of the New York Times tax investigation came out. Because, and you write in your book, I pulled this because I read your book, and this is the part that stays with me. In the end, we found in the areas in which we chose to look, particularly in the one Russian financial deal we examined as a result of Cohen's cooperation, left me with a deeply unsatisfying feeling about what else was out there that we did not examine. One of my strengths and simultaneously one of my flaws as an investigator is the desire to turn over every rock, go down every rabbit hole, try to master every detail. In this investigation, that tenacity was as much an asset as a curse. The inability to chase down all financial leads or to examine all crimes gnawed at me and still does. I think about that, what you wrote there, when I read all these stories as a potential new place where Trump, who is by every standard a rich man, but he seems in all of these revelations like he was always needing help from someone about being over leveraged.
Well, to follow up on what David said, I think that the president, if he is not reelected, is going to be very busy. I think there's sort of three buckets of things he has to worry about. At the federal level, there'll be the decision of the new attorney general whether he should be charged with obstruction of justice for the matters relating to the special counsel investigation. And I think we may see the president do something we've never seen any president do, which is try to self-pardon. But that will at least delay any sort of federal decision. But at the state level, you have a criminal investigation in the Manhattan DA's office, and that looks like to be a classic follow the money investigation. Reminds me very much of what we did with Paul Manafort. And they're clearly going after just the right things, which is they need the internal accounting documents. And that's a criminal investigation. And then, as David pointed out, the Letitia James Attorney General investigation, that is currently a civil investigation. And it may or may not proceed, but it's important to note that a civil investigation at the Attorney General level can turn into a criminal investigation if they find sufficient proof and can prove intent. And what David talked about is one of at least 4 transactions worth hundreds of millions of dollars that the Attorney General in New York is looking at. So, this president is going to be quite busy. And obviously, I should probably point it out, the president cannot pardon his way out of state investigations, whether they are civil or criminal.
David, can you put some broader context around that? I mean, it seems like there's never a revelation that says, Donald Trump did X, Y, or Z by the book. There's never a business deal that when under scrutiny says, this was a model for how to, buy a casino in Atlantic City, or this was a model for how to take money out of your businesses and invest in a campaign. There's not a single example of any of that. And it says a couple things to me. One, he's shady. 2, he didn't think he was going to win. And 3, to what Andrew Weissmann's saying, should he lose, he faces a lot of legal exposure.
I think that's right about his legal exposure. Look, the Trump Organization, before he got into politics, it was just not that big of a company. He had this sort of famous name, but it was not that big of an enterprise. And I think, and he also was very difficult to deal with. So a lot of folks, I think, just didn't bother trying to sort of dig into his businesses. There was one notable exception, which was the Trump University investigation, which Trump fought tooth and nail, ended up having to settle for $25 million. To me, the most instructive sort of case study of this is actually the Trump Foundation, this really small charity that Trump ran. I wrote about a little bit in 2016. It had been going on forever, and it had been breaking the law forever. But there was not enough money, not enough whatever for people to dig into it. But once they did, once the New York Attorney General dug into it, they found all kinds of really blatant violations of the law. And to me, it was the same executives at Trump's organization. It was the same accountants at Mazars that handled that foundation, that handled all of Trump's other financial dealings at his company. So if those people could screw up on that scale and break the law that many times on the Trump Foundation, it doesn't bode well for their ability to withstand the scrutiny of a New York AG and a Manhattan DA at the same time.
And Andrew Weissmann, it doesn't bode well for the country that he leads, because it would appear, based on what we know, and a lot of it we know from your investigation, he imported a lot of those guiding principles to the presidency. I'm not going to let you leave, though, without pressing you on what you said in your last answer. You could imagine him self-pardoning? Do tell.
Well, there's no question that the Constitution has conferred on the president the power to pardon, and it's incredibly broad. And even though lots of people think it can be abused, but no president has ever tried to actually pardon himself. And you could imagine this president saying, "Why not give it a try? What's the downside?" The downside is it doesn't work.
You're
the Supreme Court says.
Right.
The Supreme Court says, you know what, you can't. Well, then so what? He's back in the same place that he would have been, except it brings him delay. So why not try it? So I do expect, if he's not reelected, that's something we will see him try.
And I just have to press you on this. Do you think that would be like a prophylactic protection from charges being brought? Like, can you pardon yourself before you've been charged?
Yes, you can. And leaving the part about self-pardoning, but can you pardon somebody who has not been charged? Yeah, look at Gerald Ford with respect to Richard Nixon. You can, in this country, do that. There's debates in other countries that have the pardon power, whether you can do it. But here, it is not necessary to first be charged and convicted before you can get a pardon.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.